Canadian Studies from Brno, the podcast of the Canadian Studies Centre at the Masaryk University. I'm your host, Dr. Denisa Krásná, and today I'm joined by Paul von Blum, a historian, activist, educator, and lifelong advocate for social justice. Paul teaches at UCLA in African American and Communications Studies, has been active in the civil rights and anti-war movements since 1960s, and is also an expert on political art and the extraordinary figure of Paul Robeson. He is the author of 9 books and hundreds of articles on art, culture, education, and politics. His memoir, A Life at the Margins, Keeping His Political Vision, chronicles nearly 50 years of political activism. Paul is currently in Brno, teaching an intensive course on North American political art, among others. Today we'll talk about the intersections of art, activism, and history across borders. Paul, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you very much. This is, for me, a wonderful opportunity to share my observations, not only about my life of political activism, but about my very long commitment to Canada and to Canadian studies, which I've attempted to do at UCLA, to try to get my own students involved in understanding our wonderful neighbor to the north.
And that's amazing, and we'll get to that. But let's start with you. You've done so many extraordinary things in your life. I'm interested what first awakened your political consciousness. Was there a particular event or person who set you on the path towards activism?
I think probably my parents. My father was a Holocaust survivor. And when he came to the United States as the only member of his family to survive the horrors of Auschwitz, he almost immediately realized that the same racism that killed his family was being directed against the black population in the United States. And after a service in the United States Army, he almost immediately became a civil rights activist. And in the mid-1950s, he and my mother and several other families embarked on one of the most important historical episodes of the early civil rights movement. They helped to integrate a town called Levittown, north of Philadelphia. And they and several other families helped a black family moved into an all-white community. There was extraordinary violence. I was 14 at the time, and they brought me along. They left the other children. I had then 3 siblings. I now have 4. And they brought me along, and I was a witness to it. And that awakened my consciousness. That was the time of the early civil rights movement. And it affected me profoundly. It's affected me for the remainder of my life. It still affects me.
I'm now realizing you devoted 2 chapters, I think, in
Yes.
your memoir to this. Okay, well, that's an extraordinary story already. But so then you joined the civil rights movement when you were a young man. What did that experience teach you?
When we moved to California because it was impossible for my father to keep a job, he was being blacklisted. It was still the last days of McCarthyism. And they blacklisted my father. So we had to move 3,000 miles away so that my father could reestablish his own job life. And shortly after I graduated from high school, it was perfectly clear, given what had happened in Levittown, that I had to go to the South. And as a young university student, I really told everybody that I was going south. And I did. At, I think, the age of 19, I made my first trip to the South, where I joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And that's where it really all began as a young person.
So very early on. And so how have your experiences in activism, your lifelong activism, informed the way you teach? Do you see the classroom itself as a political or activist space?
Everything is political. Because I had such intense experiences in the civil rights movement, where I saw violence by racists, where I involved myself in a wide variety of nonviolent activities, where I had the opportunity of meeting people like John Lewis, where I learned about good trouble, where I was from time to time arrested, where I was from time to time subjected to political violence, where it was not terribly brutal, but I did sustain some injuries, where it dawned on me that I had to incorporate that vision into everything I did. When I first started out, I had no idea that I was going to become a university teacher. But as the years went on, I realized that this is what I wanted to do. And early on, I realized that I needed to pursue higher education. And my ambition was to get a PhD. I was studying political science, and that's what I decided to pursue. Life interceded. And in 1964, I was arrested yet again in a demonstration against the Bank of America because of their discriminatory hiring policies. I was arrested, tried, convicted, and then sent to the probation department, where I was asked if I was sorry for my crimes. And I responded, absolutely not.
Wow. And what was the punishment?
The punishment was that I was sent back to the judge, who brought me into his chambers and told me that I had a demonstrated contempt for the law. I don't have a contempt for the law. I do have a contempt for the law when it discriminates against anybody, people because of race, gender, sexual orientation, or anything else. So the judge brought me into his chambers and said that he was going to give me a unique penalty, and that he put me on probation for 3 years, told me I had the option of not accepting it, but on condition that instead of doing a PhD in political science, he would sentence me to law school, and that I would have to go 3 years for the study of law, which is the usual American way. It's different from the European way, and that because of my contempt for the law, I would have to study it. If I rejected it, he would put me in jail for 6 months. And I did not want to go back to that jail. I had kind of an unpleasant experience there. So with great reluctance, I accepted the terms of probation, and I went to Berkeley. I was admitted there also to the PhD program, and I started the study of law. 2 weeks later, I thought that the study of law was absolutely absurd, and I left it. I went back to the political science department, and they accepted me again, and I had to inform the judge, and he was outraged. He sent me a telegram, which, of course, is a mode of communication that does not exist anymore. And he said that I had 48 hours to get back to the law school, or he would rescind the probation and sentence me to jail. So I went back and I finished. I completed the entire 3-year curriculum, and I finished, and I passed the state bar examination. I wouldn't say it was a horrible experience. It was just a boring experience, and I survived.
And you've used it well, because in a way, that judge gave you a weapon, right? And now you teach here at not UCLA, but you teach at UCLA, of course, but here in Brno at the law faculty as well.
Yes, it's really interesting because I did pass, and I have a license to practice law. And on the side, I have taken cases, civil rights cases, some feminist cases on behalf of social justice. I've never made money. I've always done that pro bono. I continue to pay my bar fees. I continue to be an active lawyer. I don't do as much as I used to, but I continue every once in a while to do cases. And I have been teaching in the School of Law here at Masaryk for probably close to 10 years. And I teach courses. They're not substantive law. They're things like humanities in the law. I taught a course in March on Franz Kafka's trial. All of the things that I wish I had had in law school and never had. But my real passion remains literature, the humanities, the kinds of things that I teach here in the Department of English and American Studies. And somehow I managed to convince the people at Berkeley that I would be a good teacher. They hired me.
And you are.
And I proved that I was a good teacher. And that was in 1968. And I've been doing it ever since.
It's your huge passion, but you've described your life, institutional life especially, as one at the margins. What does it mean to you? Why?
Me is at the margins is that I've never been fully accepted by the traditional faculty. They don't quite understand me. I teach literature. I teach visual art. I've never had a course in art history in my life, but I've been teaching it for almost 50 years. I've written books on visual art. I have written 5 art history books. I think I'm good at that. I love teaching about visual arts, especially about artists on the margin, as I am, women artists, African-American artists, Mexican-American artists, LGBT artists, people not widely recognized, but I try to recognize them. So what I do sometimes confuses, mystifies some of the traditional faculty. And sometimes that has caused me some conflicts. I describe that in A Life at the Margin. And sometimes they have been extraordinarily hostile to me. I have fought back. Many of the people who've been at the margins get dismissed. What my adversaries have never realized is that I was a civil rights organizer, and I know how to fight back. I have been an advocate on the streets. I'm good at this. I know how to fight back. I know how to organize. And so here I am. I'm still a teacher. I'm still a university faculty member. I'm still doing it.
Especially in this day when a lot of faculty are being dismissed in the United States under the second Trump administration.
Yes.
But we'll get more to politics later. Now let's stay with art. You wrote that art and politics are inseparable. You said everything in life is politics. But when did that connection between art and politics first become clear to you personally?
It became clear to me early on, but not in a very specific way. As a child, growing up in Philadelphia, I remember going to the Philadelphia Art Museum and seeing some works, and it dawned on me that there was a connection, but I didn't have the intellectual understanding that I did. What really dawned on me was when I was still in law school and I took my first foreign trip, when I took a bus ride from Tijuana, Mexico, to Mexico City, a 50-hour bus ride.
That's a long bus
ride. It was
ride.
exhausting, and I got off first in Guadalajara and then in Mexico City, and I saw the magnificent murals of Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros. And that was life-changing for me because I saw how magnificent artists could paint political and historical struggles. And that transformed me in ways that really reestablished my life and really created a scholarly path for me. And I realized that you could combine artistic passion with social and political concerns. And that's what I've been doing my entire life, at least my scholarly life.
We have this in common. I also really enjoy Activism, both in classroom and in research. And it's great that you live in LA with so many great murals and Chicano artists. Exactly.
We have Chicana artists in Los Angeles, some of whom have studied with the masters. One of my best friends in Los Angeles as an artist is Judy Baca, and she studied with Siqueiros.
Wow.
And she has just painted a mural that has me in it as a 19-year-old.
Oh, really?
And it's going up on the Great Wall.
Oh, that's amazing.
In January or February, I intend to take my students and ask my students, who is that kid sitting in a sit-in?
Well, congratulations. You have to send us pictures.
I will.
And so here you teach a course on North American political art, and you include Canadian political and First Nations art. What drew you to these works of Canadian?
I've always been interested in Canada. And so, because I've had the opportunity of traveling extensively, I realized that in the same way that Mexican artists have chronicled their experience, I realized that Canadian artists would also have to do the same. So I think my first commitment there was looking in British Columbia. It's the closest to where I've lived in California. So my first real visit to Canada was Vancouver, which is a city I really enjoy. I go there as often as I can. And I guess the first artist that I saw was Emily Carr. Now, I know she was not First Nations, but what I liked about Emily Carr when I saw her both in Vancouver and especially in Victoria was the way in which she portrayed the lives of the Indigenous population. And so I saw her work and I realized that these were people who had been in Canada long before European arrivals. And it just generated my interest in First Nations and their lives and their culture in the same way that I'm interested in the Indigenous population in Mexico and the Indigenous tribes in the United States. And I realized that there is a parallel. And so through Emily Carr's work, it was a catalyst for me to learn more about the First Nations and their experiences in Canada. And so Emily Carr's art set me off for that kind of discovery. And it's what I tell my students, that art is a corrective. It allows people an educational opportunity that they probably don't get in the formal educational process.
Very true. Can you name any other Canadian artists that really speak to you?
Yes. In subsequent travels to Canada, I saw many other artists. I had the opportunity of going to both Quebec and then to Ontario, and I spent a lot of time in Toronto, and I guess also a little bit in, I'm all over Ontario. I think the artist that really spoke to me was William Kurelic. And I had never heard of him, and I explored his work as closely as I could. I found out more about his life. He had all kinds of mental struggles, but what really intrigued me was that he had parallels to some of the American social realists. He portrayed the daily lives of ordinary Canadians. He portrayed people who had his Ukrainian background. He portrayed Jewish Canadians. He portrayed some Native lives. He portrayed just lives of people who were workers. And I loved art that portrayed working women and men. So I certainly don't claim to be an expert on William Kurelic, but I love the way in which he was a figurative artist, and that countered the kind of dominant abstract expressionism of the 40s and 50s and 60s. I don't remember his biographical details, but I remember being charmed and excited by his work. So Carr and Kurelic were the most important Canadian artists. They're the ones that I show. I'm not sure that I have the time in this semester's work. I may show a smattering of both, but I'm going to deal mostly, I think, with more contemporary works. And in this semester, I have a lot of African-American artworks because that's not really known among the Masaryk students. And I really do want to spend the time exposing them to that strain of American art.
These are excellent examples. Emily Carr, I also teach her in my classes or show her artwork.
Yeah.
And thank you for that parallel between, I think we can see some parallels between Diego Rivera and the Canadian artists too, right? With the social classes, etc.
I might add that Kurlik had Mexican influences.
Oh, nice.
And when I was documenting a little bit, that's one of the things that I discovered. And that, of course, impressed me tremendously.
So, you mentioned Mexican influence, but when you look at Canadian art through your background in American political and African American art, is there anything distinctively Canadian in any of the Canadian art?
Well, what they do is to document Canada. They are focused on their own country. And because they do that, I'm able to take that back to my U.S. audiences and say, look, there's a Canadian culture. There are people north of us who have a distinct culture. And this is something you absolutely do not learn in U.S. education, which is an extraordinary deficiency.
Okay, so, Paul, you understand art as a form of resistance. We've made that clear. And that brings us to a figure who embodied that idea and whom you've studied and written about extensively. In fact, you've written a book, Paul Robeson for Beginners by Paul von Blum, and also illustrated by Elizabeth von Notias. Is that how you pronounce her name? That's your daughter, right?
She has another partner, which is, I think, probably not uncommon.
Not uncommon at all. So your daughter illustrated your book on Paul Robeson.
Yes.
Can you briefly introduce Paul Robeson to those listeners who have never heard of him?
Sure. I grew up knowing about Paul Robeson. My parents knew Paul Robeson. My parents were very progressive political activists. When I was a child, in the background of my house, they played Paul Robeson's records. I introduced Paul Robeson a couple of weeks ago in my Masoret class because I showed a portrait of Paul Robeson by my daughter, Liz. It's in that book. And I tell them that portraiture itself is a way by which you can introduce, or you can use biography. You can show people that they've never heard of. And not surprisingly, not a one of them had heard of Paul Robeson. That's typical also in my U.S. classes. He was America's greatest Renaissance person. At his 100th birthday in 1998, he was born in 1898, I was the keynote speaker at a major conference in Brooklyn, and I spoke all over the place. I was on television, everywhere, because I had written about, it was before this book. And I was quoted by the New York Times, and I said that he was America's greatest Renaissance person. And the reporter from the New York Times said, Professor von Blum, I don't like the title professor, but they said, do you really want to say that? And I looked at him and I smiled and I said it. I don't say things I don't really want to say. So he went with that in the quotation. He really was a Renaissance person. He was an extraordinary singer. He was also one of the most extraordinary athletes ever. He was a star U.S. football player when he went to Rutgers College, now university, in New Jersey. He was a star basketball player, a star track star, a star baseball player. Everything he did brilliantly. And after he finished his university studies, he had to decide what he was going to do. And he decided he was going to become a lawyer. And he went to Columbia Law School. He was the only black student at this very major and prestigious law school. And he finished. He didn't particularly like the study of law, but he did it. When he graduated, he actually started working as a lawyer, but his law firm put him in the back office because they didn't want a black face with the public. And after 2 years, he quit. I mean, I use the anecdote in the book, and I'll say it here. One of the secretaries said, "I won't take dictation from a nigger." And that's horrible. It's disgusting and it's repulsive. And Paul Robeson said, "I'm quitting." And what I write, I'm not sure I actually use the quotation in the book or not, but the law's loss was the world's gain. And he went on and he became one of the great theater stars. He became an extraordinary stage actor. He played in Eugene O'Neill's plays. He played in plays in New York and in London. And eventually he starred in Shakespeare's Othello, which he performed in London and then in the United States, the first black actor in the U.S. to perform that role. And it was to astounding crowds, the greatest performance at the time ever playing Othello. And it was never filmed, but I actually have an audio recording of it. It's absolutely brilliant. And at the same time he was doing that, he was also the first major African-American film star. He starred in 11 films, and he set the path for people like Sidney Poitier and so Denzel Washington and so many others, all of whom have acknowledged that he was the person who created the path for them. Some of the films are not so great. I've written an article about that. But he set the path for them. And then he went on and he became a political activist. And that was part of the reason that we don't know him. He was also an extraordinary linguist. I mean, some of us who speak more than one language, I know that you do. I struggle with two others. But he probably spoke 15 to 20 languages. It was just amazing. He could speak these languages fluently, and I've heard him. And he sang in these languages. He was a magnificent singer.
Wasn't Czech one of them, or Russian? Or there
I
was
know
a Slavic
I've heard him in Czech. I know he sang regularly in Prague. I've heard snippets of speech in Czech, but I don't really know if he spoke Czech. He spoke Russian fluently. And I know he dealt with Slavic languages. I'm not sure about Czech, but he could handle Chinese. You can listen to him singing in Chinese. I play that when I teach my Robeson class or in other contexts. Just amazing. But he became a progressive activist, especially during the Spanish Civil War, because like so many artists and intellectuals, he supported the Spanish Republic against the onslaught of Franco's fascist rebellion. And then when he came back to the United States, he immediately joined the various protests against racism and some of the, especially in the 50s against McCarthyism. And he was blacklisted. And the blacklist was severe. They took his passport, and that's why he was unable to perform almost anywhere. And he was not even allowed to travel to Canada, which is why he had to give concerts right at the Peace Arch, which you probably know.
That's what I was going to ask you about. He was barred from going to Vancouver, where he was supposed to have a concert. And what happened then? This concert, he was invited there by miners, workers, right? Well, like mining union, workers union. And so what happened then? Because these were, of course, also activists in Canada, and they organized these concerts right at the border, right?
Correct.
There were 4 of them, I think?
There were, I believe, 4 concerts.
4 concerts.
And they were recorded. It's possible to get a CD of the Peace Arch concerts. And they're remarkable because he stood at the Peace Arch. I know that well. I've gone so often. It's at Blaine, Washington, right at the border between Washington State and British Columbia. And when you travel to Vancouver by automobile, or if you stop, but you can walk across and then take public transportation.
It's actually a lovely place because it's right by the ocean.
Exactly.
It's very Pacific Northwesty, quite like that border. It's also very expansive. I don't know what it looked like back then, but it probably was quite big. And so I imagine there were many people listening to Paul Robeson.
It's almost like a picnic ground. And you can sit there, and I've seen that when I've crossed there, and they have the little marker. You can grasp onto the marker, and that's what he did. There are pictures of him doing that. And they put a flatbed truck there, and he mounted the flatbed truck, and he stood on it on the U.S. side. He was barred from Canada. The U.S. wouldn't let him go in, and with the complicity of the then Canadian government, they would not allow him, but the miners invited him. I think there were probably 30,000 people amassed at the Canadian side of the border, and they put up the microphones, and he gave welcoming remarks. I should add this, in addition to all of his other talents, he was an extraordinary orator. He was a son of a minister, and the Black church is probably the best incubator of oratorical brilliance in American life. I can get back to that in a moment. Let me continue about Robeson. He grew up watching his father give sermons. And his father was quite an orator because Black ministers know how to work a crowd. And so he got up and he thanked the crowd, thanked the union for inviting him. And after his remarks, he began to sing. And one of the songs, for example, was Joe Hill, which is an old American labor song about a martyr who was captured and executed in 1915. And he sang that. And he sang so many of the old Black spirituals. And he gave a rousing concert, and then he gave, and I don't remember which of the ones, he gave a talk about the repression and the struggle for freedom and dignity. These were remarkable events, standing right at the border. And of course, because I've come to learn a great deal about Robeson and writing about it, these are things that I've documented and I find extraordinarily moving.
That's incredible. So at these Peace Arch concerts, would you say there were, or do you know if there were more Canadians than Americans?
Probably.
And so is Paul Robeson more well-known in Canada? Or?
He's well-known in Canada. He's a very familiar presence in Canada. I've only given a few speeches in Canada, but I have in, I think, once or twice in Toronto, much more often in Vancouver. But when I mention Robeson, there's a greater level of familiarity that I find than in the United States. I mean, in my classes, even in my large classes of, say, 150, when I mention Robeson, it's only one or two, if that. In Canada, a higher percentage. So my guess, and it's just a guess, is that Robeson is probably more well-known, if not in the formal educational process, just in the general culture, not in the United States. We did a lot after 1998. We got him on a postage stamp. We took whatever steps we could to restore him back to the reputation that he deserved. But there was a lot of reputational loss, not only of Paul Robeson, but of so many other major cultural figures that were just blacklisted.
Unfortunately, he was, like you said, he was politically active during McCarthyism. And so that is a really nice bridge to today's times, because now we can see a sort of McCarthyism as well. Even, if we look at some statistics, there's even more also censorship at U.S. institutions right now. So you're the exception, be still freely speaking up. And I think that's very important. So I would say now let's wrap up and say to our listeners that they should read your book about Paul Robeson and learn more about him. And now let's move on to the present moment, the democracy, Trump, Canadian border, what's happening there. He said you have many students, Canadian students at UCLA, and they are now worried. Why are they worried?
I've always had Canadian students. I've always loved having Canadian students because when they come in just for my regular consultation hours, I just enjoy talking to them about Canada, and they always appreciate it. But now, as you can well imagine, they're horrified at what's happening. And they've spoken out in class ever since Trump has been elected. And they say adamantly in class, "We are not your colony." They've made it crystal clear. They said, "We are not going to be your 51st state." They're not going to be the 51st state. And they were really offended even when Trump floated that idea. And he never stepped back from it. He still continues to think that Canada is going to become the 51st state. That's absolutely absurd.
It is absurd. Why do you think he keeps saying that?
I don't know why Trump says that. I'm not a psychoanalyst, but it just seems to me to be some kind of narcissistic impulse. I mean, there's absolutely no way that Canada is going to become the 51st state of the United States. But we can see that in the news. Canadians have begun not coming to the United States, where they often come during the winter. You can see that American products are being taken off Canadian shelves. We can see that instead of American wines, for example, Canadian wines from British Columbia now being, there's a variety, there are a variety of things that are happening. And it's reflected in the conversations that I'm having with my Canadian students. It's actually a very good thing for my U.S. students because they're seeing something that they were never aware of. Once again, I've made this point. My U.S. students are blissfully unaware of Canadian life, Canadian culture, and Canadian politics. They don't, I mean, there are obviously exceptions, but the vast majority don't even know that Canada has a parliamentary system. They don't know how the Canadian parliamentary system works. I mean, if some of them think that Canada has a president.
So in a way, this is an educational opportunity.
Oh, wonderful.
Hopefully many Americans will learn more about Canada. But do you think it will, this second Trump administration, do you think it will affect Canada in some other ways too, like maybe culturally?
Yes, I think it probably will, and probably for the best. I think there'll probably be more murals. I'm looking for them. Mm-hmm. I think that there may be additional artworks. I mean, one of the things when I taught my course on North American mural art here, I did incorporate Canadian art murals that dealt with the horror of what happened when First Nations children were taken from their homes and put into these terrible so-called schools. Yeah. I mean, I know about that, and I mentioned that. I mentioned that, and even a lot of the Czech students had only, at best, vaguely heard of that, and that's scandalous. And so that's something that I deal with in my U.S. classes, and that's absolutely new. For the most part, to my U.S. students.
Oh, wow.
So my job, look, I'm an educator. Mm-hmm. I've been a political activist, but I'm also an educator. In my heart, in my gut, I'm an educator. I'm a teacher. My job, and I'm going to continue to do it. I have no intention of stopping, no intention of retiring. I love to teach. I believe I'm good at it.
You are.
And I want my students to learn things new. They need to know this. They need to know about Canada. They're close to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the neighbor. They should.
It's right there. When they ask, well, Canada, I said, and I joke. I say, look, you're in California. You live in LA. Take the 101 highway, but just keep going. Just keep going.
And they'll see something really beautiful up there.
It's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's spectacular.
And hopefully, well, maybe now Canada can also serve as a moral, intellectual, or political refuge like it did during the Vietnam War, for example.
It surely did. There were, I knew young people then my age, men, and sometimes partners, who went with them because they refused to serve in the war in Vietnam. I was of draft age at the time, and I thought about that, and I liked Canada. I mean, the city I knew was Vancouver, and I thought that might be a refuge. I made a personal decision. I was not going to go to Canada or Sweden. That if I had to face that, I would rather go to prison. I didn't have to.
You never escape.
No, I never. We had something called the draft lottery, and I got a high number. That was just blind luck. And so because I had a blind number, I didn't get drafted. I would never have served in the war in Vietnam.
I know you wouldn't. Absolutely not. Well, let's bring it back to you personally before we close this fascinating conversation. After a lifetime of activism and teaching, what keeps you hopeful? And also, what keeps your work fresh for you?
I keep learning. I love to learn. I love to learn new things. But I'm not an optimist. I gave a speech on Saturday. It's Monday now. I gave the speech in Prague at the No Kings protest. It's covered. It was small, as I thought. I mean, there were 7 or 8 million people in the U.S., but I'm here and not there.
That'd be almost the whole country.
There was a lot throughout the country. My siblings were on them. My daughter was on them, and where they live. That's my family. But I gave one of the speeches at Jan Pollock Square, and I gave it in my usual way. I ended it by saying, I'm not an optimist. I'm not hopeful. My friends know that I'm pretty gloomy about that, but that doesn't stop me. It will never stop me. I'm going to go out anyway, even though I'm not particularly helpful. I'm going to go out anyway. I have to do what I have to do. I'm going to continue to do it. I'm going to continue to teach. I hope we can repair the damage of Trump's fascism, and I call that, and I understand when I'm using that word. I don't use it lightly, but that's what it is. I'm calling it because it's true. I think it will probably be generations before we repair the damage. I'm a realist. I get up every morning not worrying about death. I get up every morning thinking about life. But I'm also a realist. The damage, it will transcend my lifetime. So be it. I'm still going to do everything I can to move it in the other direction. That's how I want to live my life.
Which is amazing, but it still, brings me to the question about activist burnout. You must have had that in your life.
No.
You never had it?
No, I get discouraged. Everybody gets discouraged. I certainly have never had any burnout as a teacher.
That's amazing.
So
that's because you keep learning, right?
Yeah, because I keep learning, and I love. I keep seeing young people who are energetic. I keep having wonderful meetings with students. Tonight I'm dealing with Amnesty International at the law school. One of my wonderful students said that I inspired her in several classes, and she started an Amnesty chapter. She would like me to speak to her group tonight, and I will. So it's very, very gratifying. But of course you get burned out, but you keep doing it. I mean, you sit down and you say you have to keep doing it. I'm not going to get discouraged and do nothing. I have to do it. You just have to do it. I don't get burned out as a teacher. I get tired and discouraged as an activist. And then you say, what else can you do except to continue to do it?
To fight.
That's what you have to do.
That's right.
You do it.
That's what we as humans are supposed to do, I guess. Stay active.
You just do it.
Well, you're a great inspiration when it comes to this. And I always think of you whenever I get a little bit burnt out or discouraged. I think of Paul. Monica and I, we do that all the time. We just think of what Paul would do. And, Paul still has that energy. So I love that. Do you have any advice for young people, especially those in Canada or in Central Europe, who want to combine scholarship and activism?
You can do that kind of a life. It's never easy, but a valuable life is never easy. My first book that I taught in the Law and Humanities class was Tolstoy's Death of Ivan Ilyich. And it was the story of a man who squandered his life. He lived a life according to the demands of other people, everything according to fashion. You don't have to live that way. You can create your own life. You can live according to your own ideals, and you can do it. It's never easy. There are always roadblocks, but it is always possible. We have one life. We can live it, and we can live it according to the ideals that we create. It's doable. People can do it.
That's a great advice.
You can always do it.
That's a great advice. So what do you want your students to take away from your classes?
That they can create their own lives. And those lives can be socially responsible. You can make your life relevant to others, and you can make other people's lives better. You can do that. A lot of people don't, but you can. I hope my students do that. I know many of them have, because many of them remain in contact with me. I know that. They do. I mean, I have good, strong anecdotal evidence. Every day or every few days, I get wonderful messages from former students. It's extremely gratifying. I love that work.
So maybe that was also the answer to my previous questions about burnout. If you get great feedback, it's also
always
it's also easier to continue the work you're doing because it makes sense. It gives you sense.
I get wonderful feedback. One of my students from this department, English and American Studies, she came with me on the train to Prague, and she came to my presentation. She's going to come with me tonight to the law faculty. And I had a student from the law faculty in March who loved my course in Kafka's Trial, and she came to my poster art class.
They keep returning. I know your classes are incredibly important and very popular here.
They keep coming. And so because they keep coming, I will keep coming back.
So my last question, Paul, if you could speak to your younger self, the student activist of the 1960s, what advice would you give him?
I would say, here you are at 19. Can you possibly imagine that you would still be doing this so many decades later? And it would give me a smile on my face. Yeah, I still have scars from doing it. They're scars, but they're worth it.
They
it was worth
sure are.
Yeah, it was worth it. But, when I say it was worth it, that presupposes that it's almost over. I don't see it as almost over. I mean, we never can control biology, but here I am. I seem to be
very
as energetic
active,
as ever.
Energetic, very enthusiastic, more energetic than many of us. So like you wrote in your extraordinary memoir, you still have decades of inspiring others and changing the world. So thank you, Paul, for your work.
I don't think about mortality. I think about living.
that's the best advice you gave here, I think, among the many others you gave. So thank you, Paul, for joining us here, for sharing your life of work, of art, of teaching, of activism in this podcast.
Thank you for so much.
This has been Canadian Studies from Brno, a podcast from the Canadian Studies Centre at Masaryk University. In the show notes, you can find the link to Paul's website, where you can learn all about his work, including his writings on political art and Paul Robeson. Thank you for listening. To support us, please subscribe to Canadian Studies from Brno and follow us on Instagram at Canadian Studies_Muni, MUNI. Stay tuned for the next episode.